Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I'm not really the type to browse the dark web. I mean, sure, I've heard all the horror stories, like most people, but curiosity got the better of me. A few weeks ago, I came across a thread on a conspiracy forum. A pretty standard site, nothing shady, just the usual aliens built the pyramids crowd. But someone mentioned this other site, a forum buried deep on the dark web, where users were obsessed with preparing for something they called the arrival. Aliens. Real aliens. It sounded ridiculous at first, but the way they talked about it, like it was a fact, not a theory, got to me. These weren't your typical tinfoil hat-wearing types. The posts were disturbingly rational, detailed. They shared blueprints, logs, maps, and even supposed intercepted communications from government agencies. I'm a skeptical guy by nature, but their confidence unnerved me. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. And that's how I ended up downloading Tor and following breadcrumbs to this hidden forum. When I finally found the site, it had no flashy graphics or ominous warnings. It was simple, like a community for hobbyists, except these hobbyists were dead serious about tracking extraterrestrial activity. The forum was called The Watchers. As soon as I registered, I got a message from an admin named Xenon Prime. It was short, just a few sentences welcoming me and giving advice on where to start. Nothing too strange, but there was something odd about the posts. People talked about zones and phases like they were already happening, but there was no public record of these events. There were satellite images with unexplainable anomalies, cryptic logs about certain areas being quarantined by unnamed agencies, and diagrams that looked way too sophisticated for your average alien-obsessed nutjob. I spent hours scrolling through this stuff, slowly falling down the rabbit hole. The members weren't hysterical or irrational. They posted in a methodical, almost scientific way. They dissected supposed footage of alien crafts, discussed weather patterns, and debated signs of what they called Stage 1. Apparently, the arrival wasn't a single event, but a gradual process. They claimed the groundwork had been laid decades ago, but the first visible signs were only now beginning to manifest. But here's the thing that really started getting to me. Some of the footage they shared looked legit. There were videos of strange aircrafts, not the flashy UFOs you see in movies, but small, fast-moving objects that zipped through the clouds at angles that didn't seem physically possible. One post in particular chilled me. It was a series of photos taken from what seemed to be a remote location, a desert, based on the cracked, dry earth. At first glance, the images showed a few rocks and what appeared to be debris. But upon closer inspection, there was something buried under the surface, something metallic, jagged, like a wreckage, but not from any aircraft I'd ever seen. I asked about it in the comments. The original poster, someone with the username Indigo Eye, replied almost immediately. They told me it was discovered in Nevada, but was covered up by the government. Then they sent me a private message. Be careful asking too many questions. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered. I should have stopped then, but I didn't. That night, I dreamt about the images I'd seen. Except in my dream, I was in the desert, standing over the wreckage. There was a buzzing sound in the air, like static, and as I reached out to touch the metallic surface, it moved. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I tried to brush it off, as my imagination getting the best of me, but something felt wrong. I checked my phone, and there was a notification from the forum, another message from Xenon Prime. "You've seen too much." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was just a coincidence, right? There was no way they knew what I'd been dreaming about, but the timing was eerie. I clicked the message, but when I tried to reply, the account was gone. I couldn't find Xenon Prime anywhere on the forum. It was like they'd never existed. I took a break from the site after that. For a few days, I ignored the notifications and went back to my regular life. Work, friends, normal stuff. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I glanced at the sky, I felt like I was missing something, like there was something hidden just beyond the clouds, waiting. Then, a few nights ago, I started hearing the buzzing. At first, it was faint, like a distant hum, but each night, it grew louder. It was coming from outside my window. I live on the outskirts of town, so it's usually quiet at night, but this sound, it was different. It felt alive, like it was crawling under my skin. Last night, I finally looked out the window. There was nothing unusual, just the dark street, a few streetlights flickering, but the buzzing was deafening. I could feel it in my bones. I grabbed my phone, opened the forum, and typed a quick message in the general chat, asking if anyone else had experienced something similar. Within seconds, I got a reply from Indigo Eye. "Stage 1 has begun." I stared at the message, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Was this all some elaborate prank, or was there something real happening? Before I could even process it, another message popped up. "They're coming." And then just like that, the buzzing stopped. It's been quiet ever since, but I don't feel safe. Every time I close my eyes, I see that metallic wreckage buried in the desert, and I hear the buzzing, even though it's gone. I think the members of the Watchers knew something, and now, so do I. I tried to keep myself busy, but the sense of unease never really left. The silence after the buzzing was almost worse than the sound itself. It was like the world had paused, waiting for something to happen. The forum kept sending notifications, but I ignored them for days, too unsettled to dive back in. But as much as I wanted to distance myself from everything, I couldn't. My curiosity was like a weight, pulling me back toward that strange corner of the web, toward the Watchers. It was late when I finally caved and logged in again. The homepage looked the same, but there was something different about the posts. A new section had appeared at the top of the forum, labeled Phase 1 Confirmed. It wasn't a discussion thread, but more of an announcement. It was locked, meaning only admins could post in it. The latest message was from Xenon Prime, or at least, the account name looked like his, but something was off. The profile picture was different. It used to be a simple icon, but now it was just static, like an old TV that had lost its signal. The message was simple. "Watch the skies. Stay vigilant. Phase 2 is coming." There were no comments, no reactions, nothing. Just silence. The rest of the forum was eerily quiet too. No new posts, no responses to anything recent. It was like the entire community had gone dark overnight. Against my better judgment, I decided to message Indigo Eye. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't even know what I wanted to ask. Why was I still so invested in this? Part of me hoped that Indigo Eye would brush everything off, tell me it was just some elaborate hoax. Maybe then I could let it go. But when I clicked on his profile, it was gone. just like Xenon Prime's account. I felt a sudden chill creep up my spine. I told myself it was just a glitch, that the admins had probably removed inactive accounts. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That's when I heard the tapping. It was faint at first, almost like the wind knocking something against the side of the house, but it grew louder, more rhythmic. Someone, or something, was outside. I forced myself to look through the blinds, trying to stay calm. There was nothing, just my empty driveway and the shadow of trees swaying in the night. But the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I grabbed my phone, hoping to record the sound for proof. As I opened the camera app, the tapping stopped, replaced by the familiar buzzing. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It was coming from my phone. The screen flickered. Static. The same static from Xenon Prime's profile picture. My heart started racing as lines of code flashed across the screen, too fast for me to read. I tried turning it off, but the phone wouldn't respond. It was like someone, or something, had taken control. A message appeared in the middle of the static. "They see you." I dropped the phone, heart pounding in my chest. It skidded across the floor, and for a moment, everything was silent again. But as I bent down to pick it up, the buzzing returned, this time louder and more erratic, like it was coming from every direction at once. The screen flickered again, and a new message appeared. "Don't look." That's when I noticed it, the light outside my window, flickering in the distance. Not like a street light or car headlights, but something different, something unnatural. The kind of light that doesn't quite look real, too bright and too sharp, cutting through the darkness like a blade. It hovered there, far enough away to make me question whether it was really there at all. But the longer I stared, the more I felt it, an overwhelming sense that whatever was casting that light was watching me. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to run, to get out of the house, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, the buzzing in my head growing louder with every second I stared at the light. My phone vibrated again. Another message. "You're not supposed to see them yet." I glanced back at the screen, half expecting the static to have taken over again, but this time, something else filled the display. It was a map, a grainy image of my neighborhood with a red dot pulsing right over my house. I wanted to believe this was some elaborate prank, a twisted trick played by hackers or trolls, but it didn't feel like that. It felt real. Too real. The kind of real you can't explain, but just know in your gut. The buzzing suddenly stopped, replaced by a sound I can only describe as breathing. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. It wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside, in the same direction as that light. The breathing matched the rhythm of the lights flickering, as if they were somehow in sync, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was waiting for me to make the first move. I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Call someone? Who would believe me? Try to leave. But what if I walked right into whatever was out there? Before I could decide, another notification buzzed on my phone. It's too late. I didn't even get a chance to react before the light outside the window shifted. It moved closer, illuminating the trees in a pale, unnatural glow. The breathing grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel it pressing in on me from all sides. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went dark. No more buzzing, no more light, just complete, suffocating silence. I stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe it was just my imagination or some bizarre glitch, but deep down, I knew better. This was just the beginning. The next morning felt wrong. Not like the aftermath of a bad dream, but like waking up in the middle of something, knowing the nightmare didn't end just because the sun came up. I tried to pretend things were normal, going through the motions of my day, brushing my teeth, making coffee, but everything felt disconnected. My mind was still locked on the night before, on the breathing, the light, and that message. It's too late. The quiet in my house was unbearable, so I decided to leave for a bit, get some fresh air, maybe clear my head. As I grabbed my keys, I noticed my phone still lying on the floor from where I dropped it the night before. I hesitated before picking it up, half expecting another message or some lingering sign of whatever had taken over my screen, but the phone was off, dead. No amount of button pressing brought it back to life. I took that as a small relief and tossed it aside, grabbing an old phone I kept as a backup. I wasn't ready to deal with the consequences of what might be on that device. I just needed a break from the house, from the buzzing, from whatever was happening. As I drove through town, everything looked the same, but there was this gnawing feeling that something had changed. I kept glancing up at the sky, half expecting to see that strange light again. It wasn't there, but that didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching, waiting. I drove without any real destination, hoping that some distance would calm my nerves. Eventually, I pulled into a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place that feels timeless. I figured a cup of coffee and a distraction would help. The moment I stepped inside, though, that uneasy feeling hit me again. It was the little things, the way the diner was too quiet for this time of day, the way the waitress barely looked at me when she took my order. I tried to shrug it off as paranoia, but something about the atmosphere felt off. I sat in the corner, staring out the window, watching people pass by. I wanted to convince myself I was being ridiculous, but the longer I sat there, the more certain I became that things weren't right. People seemed distracted, like they were moving through the day on autopilot. No one was making eye contact, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry, even though there was no reason to rush. Then I noticed something even stranger. One of the regulars at the diner, a man I'd seen almost every time I'd visited this place, wasn't there. I didn't know his name, but he was always sitting by the counter, chatting up the waitstaff. I'd never seen the place without him. Curious, I asked the waitress where he was. She stopped mid-step and gave me this blank stare, as if I'd just asked something I wasn't supposed to. "Who?" she asked, her voice flat, mechanical. "The guy who usually sits by the counter," I said, growing uneasy. "You know, older guy with the baseball cap. He's here every morning." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to process what I was saying. Then she shook her head. "No one like that comes in here." That didn't make sense. I'd seen him just a few days ago, and he was a fixture in this place. There was no way she didn't know him, but the way she said it, like she genuinely believed it, gave me chills. I wanted to press her more, but before I could, another customer stood up from their table and walked out. It wasn't until the door swung shut behind them that I realized who it was. Indigo Eye, or at least it looked like him. The face was familiar, matching the small profile picture I'd seen on the forum. He didn't glance in my direction as he left, but something about his stiff, deliberate movements made my skin crawl. I quickly got up and followed him outside. He was already halfway down the block, walking fast. Too fast. "Hey!" I called out, trying to catch up. "Indigo Eye!" He didn't stop, didn't even turn around. I picked up my pace, heart pounding in my chest, until I was just a few steps behind him. He rounded a corner into an alley, and I followed without thinking, my adrenaline spiking. The alley was empty. I stopped dead in my tracks, looking around in confusion. There was nowhere he could have gone. No doors, no side streets, just a dead-end brick wall. He had disappeared. I backed out of the alley slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I could still feel that strange energy, like something was there, watching from the shadows. Something I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. I pulled out my phone and tried logging back into the Watchers forum. Maybe I could find more information, some explanation for what was going on. But when I entered the URL, the site was gone. Not like it had been taken down or blocked. It just didn't exist anymore. The error message wasn't even your standard 404. It was a plain black screen with a single message in white text. "You've gone too far." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What did that even mean? Too far into what? I hadn't done anything except join some fringe forum, ask a few questions, and look at some bizarre images. But that didn't explain the disappearance of people, the strange light, or the messages. And it definitely didn't explain why the name Indigo Eye was burned into my thoughts like an echo. As I drove home, every noise, every flicker of movement outside the window set me on edge. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was dark again, and the house loomed over me in a way that felt wrong. Almost like it wasn't really mine anymore. Like something else had claimed it while I was gone. Before I could make sense of that uneasy feeling, my backup phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message. "Do not return to the forum. Phase 2 has begun." That same buzzing sound from before started humming through the air around me, louder this time. It was as if the whole neighborhood was vibrating with it. And in the distance, hovering just over the trees, that same unnatural light flickered once more, closer than ever. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The buzzing, the light, the disappearing people. It all felt too real now, too close, the kind of close that you can't ignore, no matter how hard you try to convince yourself it's just paranoia. I sat in my living room, lights off, watching the windows. Every shadow felt like it was moving, shifting, crawling toward the house. The message on my backup phone, "Phase 2 has begun," was on repeat in my mind. The light outside had appeared again, even brighter, cutting through the trees like it was searching for something. I stayed away from the windows, trying to keep out of sight, but the sense that something was watching me only grew stronger with every passing minute. I had to know more. I couldn't sit in silence, pretending none of this was happening. Against my better judgment, I decided to reach out to the only person I thought might understand, might have some answers. But without the forum, I had no way of contacting Indigo Eye. It was as if everyone who had been a part of the Watchers had just vanished, leaving me alone with this creeping terror. I turned on my backup phone and started scrolling through old threads I had saved, looking for anything I might have missed. And that's when I saw it. A single post I hadn't noticed before, buried deep in the archives, posted by someone with the username Lucid Moth. The title sent a chill down my spine. "They come when you know too much." It was a short post, almost like a warning. Lucid Moth talked about how the forum wasn't just a place for conspiracy theories or harmless chatter. It was a gateway, a way for them to track people who were getting too close to the truth, people who knew more than they should. According to the post, anyone who dug too deep into the watchers would start to notice things: strange lights, buzzing sounds, missing people. If you're seeing the lights, it's too late, the post ended. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just a warning, it was a confirmation. Everything I'd been experiencing, the lights, the buzzing, it wasn't a coincidence. I had somehow crossed a line, and now they were watching me. As I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it all, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a call. The caller ID was blank. No number, no name. Just a ringing, cutting through the dead silence of the house. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, to break it and run. But another part, the part that needed answers, pushed me to press accept. I lifted the phone to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" For a moment, there was nothing but static, faint and crackling. Then, a voice, distorted and cold, spoke. "We are already here." I dropped the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice didn't sound human. It was warped, unnatural, like someone or something was using a machine to speak. The phone screen flickered and went dark, leaving me in silence once more. I stood frozen, barely able to breathe, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. No one knocks on my door. I live too far out of town for casual visitors. My house is surrounded by trees, isolated from the main road. No one should have been there. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I didn't move. I couldn't. For a third time, the knock echoed through the house, followed by a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like someone was dragging something metal across the doorframe. I backed away, my pulse racing, and grabbed the nearest thing I could find. A heavy bookend from the shelf. Not much, but it was something. My mind was spinning, trying to rationalize, trying to explain. Maybe it was just a prank, some sick joke. Maybe it was. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, I stumbled back, my grip tightening on the bookend as the door creaked open just an inch. And that's when I saw it. Just a sliver of light, the same blinding, unnatural light from the night before, spilling into the room. I held my breath, waiting for something, someone to step inside. But nothing happened. The door stopped moving, left cracked open just enough to let the light in. I could hear it again, the breathing, slow, heavy, deliberate, like it was right outside, waiting. Without thinking, I rushed to the door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely turn the lock. But once it clicked, I stumbled back, keeping my eyes glued to the door. The breathing continued for a few moments, then stopped. Complete silence. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? What would I even say? That I was being stalked by... what? Aliens? Government agents? A cult? There was no rational explanation for what was happening. No easy way to describe the horror creeping its way into my life. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, just listening, waiting for the sound to return. But it never did. Instead, I heard something worse. A rustling noise. From inside the house. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere down the hall. I grabbed my phone, using the screen's dim light to guide me as I crept toward the sound. My heart was pounding in my ears as I edged closer to the hallway. The rustling grew louder, more erratic, like someone or something was moving around. I held my breath and rounded the corner, aiming the faint light down the hall. The door to the spare bedroom was ajar, and from the shadows I could see something moving, something that shouldn't have been there. As I stepped closer, the rustling stopped, and then I saw it, on the floor, barely visible in the darkness. A piece of paper. No, not paper. Something else. It shimmered under the light, like a piece of thin metal, folded in half and covered in symbols I didn't recognize. It wasn't from me, and it definitely wasn't supposed to be there. I knelt down, carefully picking it up. The symbols glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing like they were alive. I didn't understand them, but somehow, deep down, I knew what they meant. I wasn't alone, and whatever had left this for me was still in the house. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like they were alive, each pulse sending a wave of unease through my body. I wanted to drop the metallic sheet, run out of the house, and never look back. But something about it held me there, like it was whispering to me, calling me to understand it. My fingers traced the unfamiliar shapes, and as I did, the faint humming returned, not from the metal, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere close. I could feel it again, that presence, not just outside, but inside. The air felt heavier, thicker. Every breath I took felt labored, like something was pressing down on me. I stood up slowly, backing out of the hallway, trying to keep my movements quiet. But as I turned to leave the spare room, the lights in the house flickered, once, twice, and then total darkness. The only light came from outside, the same eerie, unnatural glow cutting through the windows. It was closer now, surrounding the house. My phone's screen barely pierced the darkness as I fumbled my way back to the living room. I needed to get out. I needed to leave. But the door, the one I had locked so carefully just moments ago, it was wide open. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't hear it unlock. I didn't hear it open. But there it was, swinging gently on its hinges, the outside world glowing with that strange, otherworldly light. I could hear the buzzing again, louder now, like a swarm of insects crawling into my mind. I didn't want to look outside. I didn't want to see what was waiting for me. But something, some deep, uncontrollable force, pulled me toward the door. The moment I stepped out onto the porch, I saw it. Not far from my house, hovering just above the tree line, was a shape. It was massive, but not in the way a building or a plane is massive. This thing, it defied comprehension. It wasn't just a ship or an object. It felt alive. The edges of it seemed to ripple, blending into the night sky, flickering in and out of focus, as though it was phasing between here and somewhere else. And then I saw them, figures, barely visible at first, moving through the trees, their silhouettes long and slender. They weren't walking, they were gliding, moving with an unnatural smoothness that made my stomach turn. There were at least 5 of them, maybe more, and they were coming closer, moving silently, their bodies shifting in and out of the shadows cast by that glowing light. I stepped back into the house, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were trembling as I locked it again, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever those things were, they weren't bound by the same rules. They could enter whenever they wanted. The door was just a formality, a thin barrier of false security. The phone in my hand buzzed again. Another message. I didn't want to look at it, but I knew I had to. Phase 3. Contact. The house felt too small, too vulnerable. I grabbed the phone, desperately scrolling through my contacts, trying to think of someone, anyone, I could call for help. But who would believe me? What could I even say? The buzzing grew louder again, this time from inside the house. I could feel it in the walls, vibrating through the floorboards, as if the entire structure was resonating with that strange energy. The lights flickered back on, but they didn't stay steady. They pulsed, in sync with the buzzing, like the house itself was breathing. And then, without warning, everything stopped. The lights went out. The buzzing silenced. For a moment, the world felt still. Too still. I heard it again. The breathing. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was right behind me. I turned slowly, heart hammering in my chest, expecting to say one of the figures from the woods standing in my living room. But what I saw was worse. It was me. Standing there, in the middle of the room, was an exact replica of myself. It looked just like me, down to the clothes I was wearing, the same terrified expression on its face. But there was something wrong with it. Its movements were too stiff, too deliberate. It blinked at me, but the way it blinked, it was too mechanical, like someone had programmed it to mimic human actions. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. The replica took a step toward me, its eyes locked onto mine. "We are already here," it said, its voice an exact match for my own, but hollow, empty, like an echo of something that had once been human. I backed up against the wall, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The replica's expression didn't change, but its eyes. There was something behind them, something watching me, studying me. I had to get out. I had to leave. I bolted for the back door, not even thinking, just running on pure instinct. As I fumbled with the lock, I heard the door to the living room creak open. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I shoved the door open and ran outside, into the night. The moment I stepped into the yard, I saw them again, the figures from the woods. But now, they were closer, standing in a line just beyond the trees, watching me, waiting. The buzzing returned, louder than ever, as the glow from the hovering shape above intensified. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refused to move. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message. "The arrival is complete." Before I could react, the light from above fled, so bright it blinded me. I fell to my knees, hands covering my eyes, but the light pierced through, filling my mind, my body, with an unbearable pressure. It was like being torn apart and put back together all at once. And then, darkness. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of the yard. The sky was clear, the buzzing gone, the figures, the ship, everything. It was all gone. I staggered to my feet, disoriented, my head spinning. I stumbled back into the house, the door creaking behind me as I shut it. Everything looked normal, too normal, but when I glanced at the mirror in the hallway, I froze. It wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was the replica, and it smiled. It all started with boredom, like most bad decisions do. I'm not the kind of guy who usually messes around on the dark web. I know better. Everyone knows better. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when you've been spending too many late nights scrolling through Reddit and reading about stuff that's supposedly out there. You know, the kind of stories that make you question if there's something lurking beyond the reality we're used to. Anyway, I'd been down one of those rabbit holes about government cover-ups and alien conspiracies when I came across a post talking about a dark web auction this wasn't your usual shady stuff, like illegal weapons or stolen credit cards. No, this was different. This was weird. They were selling something called alien DNA. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, come on, alien DNA. But the more I read, the more I realized that the people discussing it weren't laughing. They were serious. According to the thread, this wasn't just some fake black market drug or collector's item. It was real, biological material that was supposedly smuggled from some top secret lab, something from a government cover-up. The post had links, obviously links you shouldn't click on, but there I was, hovering over it, telling myself I wasn't actually going to go through with it. I'm not an idiot, right? I was just curious. Except, I did click it. The link took me deeper into the dark web, through layers of encrypted pages and access keys, until I landed on a simple, almost plain web page, black background, white text. At the top, in bold letters, it said, Alien DNA, auction, one of a kind. The page didn't look flashy, like you'd expect some shady dark web thing to be. It was just bare, and that somehow made it worse. The only image on the page was a small clear vial filled with a strange, dark liquid sitting inside a plastic case. Beneath it was a description. Confirmed extraterrestrial biological material. Bidders must provide encrypted details for shipment. I stared at it for what felt like hours, trying to wrap my head around the idea. Was this a scam? Was someone really out there, selling what they claimed was actual alien DNA? Every instinct told me to close the page, to pretend I'd never seen it. But there was something about it that pulled me in, like I needed to know more. And before I could think it through, I clicked on the place bid button. At first, nothing happened. I felt a weird mix of disappointment and relief. Maybe it was all just a hoax, something made up to freak out idiots like me. But then, a notification popped up. Bid placed successfully. I froze. What had I just done? I didn't even know how much I had bid. I hadn't entered any details, hadn't even given them an address. But there it was, a confirmation. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was an email. The sender was anonymous, the subject line blank. When I opened it, the message was short, just 2 lines. Shipment confirmed. Delivery in 72 hours. Do not attempt to track. I didn't sleep that night. My brain was racing with a million thoughts, all of them bad. What had I gotten myself into? Would the FBI show up at my door? Was this some kind of elaborate scam? Or worse, a trap? I spent the next few days on edge, constantly checking my phone, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. No strange emails, no knocks on the door, just silence, until the package arrived. It was late in the evening when I heard the knock. Not the usual knock from a delivery guy either. This was softer, like whoever was there didn't want to be heard. I hesitated before opening the door, but when I did, there was no one there. Just a small, plain box sitting on my doorstep. No labels, no return address. Nothing to indicate where it had come from. I brought it inside, my hand shaking slightly as I set it on the table. My mind was racing again. Part of me wanted to toss it in the trash, forget this ever happened, and go back to my normal life. But another part, the same part that had clicked that link in the first place, wanted to open it to see if this was all real. I grabbed a knife and sliced through the tape. Inside was a small clear vial, identical to the one I'd seen on the auction page. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen to it. It swirled slowly when I tilted the vial, thick, and unnatural. My stomach dropped. This wasn't some prank. Whatever was inside that vial wasn't normal, and I had no idea what to do with it. For a few days, I kept it hidden in a drawer, too afraid to even touch it. I went back to work, tried to get back to my routine, but the vial was always there in the back of my mind, like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. But the thing is, you can only ignore something like that for so long. Curiosity wins in the end. It always does. One night, after a couple of drinks, okay, more than a couple, I decided to take another look at the vial. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that it was fake, that it wasn't anything more than some weird liquid someone had cooked up in a lab to mess with people like me. But as I held the vial up to the light, something strange happened. The liquid inside moved. Not just swirled like before, but it shifted, almost like it was alive. It pulsed, faintly at first, but then stronger, like it was reacting to my presence. Before I could stop myself, I opened the vial. The smell hit me first, sharp, metallic, and something else, something almost sweet. It made my head spin, but I couldn't pull away. I don't know why I did it, but I dipped my finger into the liquid just for a second. It burned, not like fire, but like ice, spreading through my skin in a cold, crawling wave. I jerked my hand back, staring at the black stain on my fingertip. It didn't wash off. No matter how much I scrubbed, the mark stayed there, like the liquid had soaked into my skin. That was 2 days ago, and now I'm starting to change. I woke up the next morning feeling off. Not sick exactly, but different. You know that groggy feeling you get after pulling an all-nighter? It was like that, but worse. My head was pounding, and my skin felt weird, almost sensitive to the touch, like I was running a low fever. I chalked it up to the drinks from the night before, and the stress of everything with the vial. I convinced myself it was nothing, just a hangover, probably. But that wasn't it. I noticed the mark on my finger first thing. It hadn't faded overnight. In fact, it was darker now, almost black, and it had spread. A thin web of veins, darker than the rest of my skin, was branching out from the spot where I touched the liquid. They looked like tiny black spider webs crawling across my hand. I scrubbed at it again, hard enough that the skin turned raw, but the marks wouldn't budge. They were beneath the surface, like ink had been injected under my skin. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was probably just a reaction to whatever was in the vial. Maybe it was a chemical, something toxic. My logical brain was scrambling for answers, trying to explain it away as some kind of skin irritation, maybe an allergic reaction. But deep down, I knew this was different. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head as I went about my day. I had work, meetings, the usual routine. The distractions helped at first. But as the hours passed, I started to notice more changes. Subtle at first. My vision seemed sharper, like I was suddenly more aware of the tiniest details in everything around me. The sound of people typing at their desks, the faint hum of the air conditioning, even the soft rustling of papers from across the room. It all felt amplified, like the world had been turned up a notch. But it wasn't just my senses. My body felt stronger, not in an obvious superhero way, but in a more unsettling sense, like I could feel something underneath the surface, something pushing its way through my veins. There was an energy inside me, and it was growing. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that this was just the result of my brain overreacting. Stress can do weird things to people, right? But by the time I got home that evening, it was impossible to ignore. The veins on my hand had spread even further, now creeping up my arm. They weren't just black anymore. There was something shimmering about them, a faint silver sheen that caught the light in a way that made my skin crawl. That night, things got worse. It started with the itching. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep, when my arm started to itch. Not the kind of itch you can scratch and be done with. This was deep, bone deep. I tried to ignore it, but it spread, moving up my arm, down to my legs, and across my chest. It felt like something was moving inside me, just beneath the skin. I sat up, gripping the edge of the bed, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I turned on the bedside lamp, and when I saw my reflection in the mirror across the room, I froze. My eyes, they weren't the same. The whites had taken on a faint, silvery tint, almost metallic. My pupils looked too sharp, too defined, like they were reflecting the light in an unnatural way. And my skin, it wasn't just the veins anymore. There were patches of it that had changed, areas where my skin had become smooth, almost translucent, like glass. I could see the faint outline of veins and bones beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, but the sound got stuck in my throat. Instead, I just stared at my reflection, heart pounding in my chest, the silence of the room pressing in around me. And then I heard it, a faint buzzing sound. At first, I thought it was in my head, just my mind playing tricks on me, like tinnitus. But the sound was coming from somewhere else. It was distant, but growing louder, like something was approaching. I looked out the window, half expecting to see, I don't know, something. But the street outside was empty, quiet. Still, the buzzing persisted, almost like it was coming from the air itself, vibrating through the walls, through me. I shut off the lamp and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over myself, like a scared kid. The buzzing didn't stop, but I lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. It wasn't just my body that was changing. Everything around me felt off. There was a sense of something bigger, something I couldn't understand, creeping closer. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was early, too early for calls. I groggily grabbed the phone, glancing at the screen. No number, just unknown caller. A cold wave of dread washed over me. My finger hovered over the answer button. I almost ignored it, but that same curiosity, the same curiosity that had led me down this dark path, made me pick up. I didn't say anything. For a moment, there was just silence on the other end. Then, a voice, low, mechanical, and distorted. "You've been exposed." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. Exposed? What did that mean? Was someone watching me? Was this all part of the auction? A trap? I glanced at my arm, the dark veins now fully snaking their way up to my shoulder. My body was changing, and I had no idea how to stop it. But worse than the changes was the growing sense that this wasn't just some weird biological reaction. It felt deliberate, like something had been set in motion the moment I opened that vial. And whatever it wasn't stopping. I didn't leave the house the next day. I couldn't. I tried to go through the motions, eat breakfast, watch TV, act like everything was fine, but my body wouldn't let me. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I felt more like a stranger in my own skin. The black veins had now spread across my chest and down my legs. My skin was colder to the touch, and those silvery patches were starting to spread too, glistening under the light like some kind of alien substance had embedded itself into my flesh. It wasn't just the physical changes. My head felt clouded, like there was a constant pressure building inside, pushing against my skull. Every sound was too sharp, too loud, and I had this creeping sense that I wasn't alone. Even when I was sitting in an empty room, I felt like there was someone, something watching me. The buzzing was worse, too. It wasn't just an external sound anymore. It was inside me, humming beneath my skin, vibrating in my bones. It was like my body was tuning in to some kind of signal, one that I couldn't block out, no matter how hard I tried. Around noon, I heard the voice again. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind. I thought I was losing it, hallucinating from lack of sleep or stress. But as the day went on, the voice grew clearer. It wasn't speaking in words exactly, but in thoughts, ideas, concepts. It was telling me things. At first, I tried to ignore it, but it was persistent, slipping into my thoughts like a parasite, taking root in my mind. It whispered about changes, about evolution, about being prepared for something. I had no idea what it meant, but it scared me. It scared me because deep down, some part of me understood. Some part of me agreed. I don't know when I lost track of time, but at some point that afternoon, I found myself sitting on the floor, the vial in my hand, the one that had started this whole mess. I hadn't touched it since that first night, but there it was, cool and heavy in my palm, the dark liquid inside swirling slowly, like it was alive. The voice was louder now, pushing me to act. It wasn't telling me to destroy the vial. It was telling me to finish what I'd started. I wanted to throw it away, to get rid of it, but my body wouldn't let me. My hand wouldn't unclench. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the vial, the alien liquid reflecting in my strange glassy eyes. And that's when I realized something. The changes. They weren't just random mutations. They were purposeful. It was as if my body was preparing itself for something, adapting, evolving. The voice in my head wasn't just noise. It was guidance, pushing me towards some kind of transformation. That thought terrified me. This wasn't just a physical change anymore. It was taking over my mind. I tried to snap myself out of it, to shake off the influence of whatever was happening to me. I needed answers, real answers. This wasn't some flu or allergic reaction. Whatever was inside that vial was changing me on a fundamental level, and I had to know why. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. I combed through forums, databases, anything I could find about alien DNA, government experiments, and the dark web. But there was nothing concrete, just rumors, myths, and vague conspiracy theories. No one had any real information. No one seemed to have experienced what I was going through, until I stumbled onto a hidden thread buried deep within one of the conspiracy sites. It was written by someone under the username Observer21. The post was old, dated nearly 10 years ago, but it immediately grabbed my attention. The title was simple: The experiment has begun. The user talked about the discovery of extraterrestrial biological material and a secret auction on the dark web where wealthy elites and black market scientists bought and sold alien DNA. According to the post, the DNA wasn't just biological. It was alive, a sentient organism that could integrate itself into the host and reshape their genetic structure. I kept reading, my pulse quickening as the pieces started falling into place. The post described how those who came into contact with the DNA would experience rapid changes, both physically and mentally. The alien organism would begin to merge with the host's body, rewriting their DNA, making them into something else, something more, something that wasn't entirely human anymore. The worst part, once the transformation began, there was no way to stop it. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. This couldn't be real. It was just some old conspiracy post, right? But everything it described, every symptom, was exactly what I was experiencing. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. If this was true, if I really had injected myself with something alien, what did that mean for me? Was I turning into something else? Something that wasn't me? And then, as if in answer to my panicked thoughts, the voice returned, clearer than ever before. "You are becoming one of us." I stood up, my head spinning, the room feeling too small, too claustrophobic. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked back at me, but it wasn't me anymore. My eyes had fully changed now, glowing faintly in the dim light, and my skin shimmered with that same unnatural silvery tint. The veins, the patches of translucent skin, it was spreading, faster now, consuming me inch by inch. I was losing myself. The voice was louder now, no longer a whisper but a command. It was telling me to embrace the change, to stop fighting. It promised me things, power, knowledge, understanding beyond anything a human could comprehend. But I didn't want that. I just wanted to be me again. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible anymore. I stumbled back into the living room, my heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do next. Could I go to a doctor? Would they even know what to do? Or was this something far beyond human medicine, something that no one could fix? Before I could decide, there was a knock at the door. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one knew what was happening to me. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. I crept toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home. But as I reached for the doorknob, the voice in my head whispered again, sending a chill down my spine. "They are here." I opened the door. The door creaked open, and my heart was in my throat. Standing on my doorstep were two figures. At first glance, they looked human, dressed in dark, nondescript suits. But there was something off about them. Their skin was too smooth, almost waxy, and their eyes had that same reflective sheen I'd seen in the mirror earlier. They didn't speak right away. Instead, they stood there, perfectly still, like they were waiting for me to make the first move. The air around them felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name, like the atmosphere was charged with static. I could feel the buzzing again, louder now, almost tangible, crawling through the air and into my bones. One of them finally spoke, his voice low and mechanical, as if it was struggling to mimic human speech. "We've come to assist with your transition." My mind went blank. Transition? The word hung in the air like a threat. I wanted to slam the door, to run, but my body didn't respond. It was as if I was rooted to the spot, my legs refusing to move, the voice in my head growing louder, drowning out my thoughts. "Let them in." I stepped aside without thinking, my hand loosening its grip on the door as the two figures glided into the house. There was no hesitation in their movements. Everything about them was deliberate, precise, like they were programmed for this moment. Once inside, they turned to face me. The taller one, the one who had spoken, tilted his head slightly, studying me with those cold, reflective eyes. "You're progressing faster than expected," he said. His tone was neutral, almost clinical, like I was some sort of experiment he was observing. The DNA is integrating. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing. What are you talking about? What do you mean by integrating? The second figure, shorter but just as unsettling, finally spoke. His voice was softer, but no less eerie. You're evolving, becoming something more. He said the last word with an unsettling calm, as though the idea should be comforting. It wasn't. I could feel my pulse quicken, the fear tightening in my chest. I don't want this, I managed to choke out. I didn't ask for this. The taller one's gaze never wavered. It doesn't matter. The process has already begun. Once exposed, there's no going back. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. No going back. I hadn't wanted any of this. I just clicked a link, bid on something stupid. It was all supposed to be a joke, a distraction. Now, my life was unraveling, and these things were telling me I had no control. I could feel it now, the change, deep inside me. The buzzing wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a sensation, a vibration that resonated with every cell in my body. The black veins were pulsing faintly, as if they were alive, feeding off whatever was inside me, spreading the alien DNA further and faster. I needed to stop it. I needed to get rid of whatever was inside me. The shorter figure seemed to sense my panic. He stepped forward, raising a hand, his movements unnaturally fluid. There's no need to be afraid. The changes are necessary. You're becoming part of something greater. Part of what? I spat, anger bubbling up through the fear. What are you turning me into? The taller one's expression didn't change, but there was something in his tone, something almost proud. A conduit. My stomach dropped. A conduit for what? For them, he replied simply. Before I could ask who they were, a strange sensation washed over me, a pressure building inside my skull, like something was pushing against my mind. The buzzing grew louder, more insistent, and the voice in my head, it wasn't alone anymore. There were others, distant at first, but growing closer, speaking in low, incomprehensible whispers. I staggered back, gripping the sides of my head, trying to block out the noise. But there was no use. The whispers were everywhere, inside me, around me, filling the room with an energy I couldn't escape. They're coming, the shorter figure said, his voice echoing in my mind. The connection is almost complete. I dropped to my knees, my body shaking, the pressure inside my head reaching unbearable levels. My skin was crawling, my vision blurring, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes, twisted, shadowy figures, moving just beyond the edges of my sight. The taller figure knelt down beside me, his voice calm, soothing. Don't fight it. This is what you were chosen for. Chosen. The word sent a jolt of panic through me. I hadn't been chosen. I hadn't agreed to any of this. But as I knelt there, struggling to hold on to my sense of self, I realized it didn't matter. Whatever was happening to me, whatever was changing inside me, was beyond my control now. The voice, the original voice, the one that had been with me since the beginning, was louder now, clearer, and it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was commanding me, pushing me to surrender, to let go. Embrace the change. You are becoming one of us. I fought against it, clinging to the last shred of who I was, but the pressure was overwhelming. My body was no longer mine. It was something else, something other. The black veins pulsed faster now, spreading up my neck, across my face. My skin shimmered in the dim light, the silvery patches glowing faintly. And then, everything went still. The buzzing stopped. The pressure eased. I opened my eyes, blinking through the haze, and the two figures stood before me, watching, but I knew, deep down, they weren't alone. The connection had been made. I could feel it. Them, whatever they were. Not just the figures in front of me, but something more. Something far beyond this world. Something vast, ancient, and incomprehensible. Their presence was everywhere now, wrapped around me like a cloak, pushing into every corner of my mind. I wasn't human anymore. The taller figure stepped back, his reflective eyes gleaming. The arrival is imminent. And then, without another word, they turned and left, gliding out the door as silently as they had come. I stood there, staring at the open doorway, my body trembling, my mind filled with 1,000 voices, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. But one thing was clear. I was no longer myself. After they left, the silence in the house was suffocating. It wasn't peaceful or calming. It was the kind of silence that presses in from all sides, making you feel like the world is holding its breath. The buzzing was gone, but that didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, its absence was more unsettling. Whatever was inside me had gone quiet, like it was waiting. I slumped against the wall, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But my mind was a mess, fragmented, like I was only holding on to pieces of who I used to be. The rest, those voices, those thoughts that weren't mine, were filling the gaps, taking up space in my head, pushing me to the edge. I didn't know what to do next. Calling for help seemed pointless. Who would even believe me? And besides, this was something far beyond human comprehension. I wasn't just infected. I wasn't just sick. I was changing, and there was no one who could stop it. I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the sink to steady myself. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed weakly as I looked into the mirror. What stared back at me was barely recognizable. My eyes, they were fully transformed now, the irises reflecting light in an unnatural way, glowing faintly. The veins that had once only traced my arms had now spread across my face, dark and pulsing, like living circuits running just beneath my skin. And my skin, God, my skin was no longer human. The silvery patches had grown, covering most of my face and neck, gleaming with a metallic sheen. It looked smooth, alien, like something you'd expect to see on a machine, not a living person. I leaned in closer, horrified by my own reflection, my fingers brushing against the cold, glass-like surface of my skin. It felt wrong. I felt wrong. But there was something else, too. Something underneath all the fear, power. I could feel it coursing through me, in my blood, in my bones. Whatever had been injected into me, whatever alien DNA was rewriting who I was, it was giving me more than just changes. I could feel the strength in my body, a strength that wasn't mine. My senses were sharper, more attuned. Every detail in the room, the faint hum of electricity, the drip of water from the faucet, the creak of the house settling, was amplified. I was becoming something more, but I didn't want it. This wasn't some gift. This wasn't something I'd asked for. It was a curse, and I knew it wasn't finished yet. I backed away from the mirror, my heart pounding. I had to do something, anything, to stop it. My body, my mind, they weren't mine anymore. I was being taken over, and soon there'd be nothing left of the person I once was. That's when the knocking started again. It wasn't from the door this time. It was coming from the windows. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent, like someone or something was trying to get in. I crept toward the window, my hand shaking. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was out there, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I pulled the curtain back just an inch and froze. They were here. Figures stood in the darkness just beyond the window, their silhouettes barely visible in the faint moonlight. At first glance, they looked human, but I knew better. Their movements were too stiff, too precise, just like the visitors who had come to my door earlier. There were more of them now, dozens, maybe more, surrounding the house. They weren't knocking, they were waiting. I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest. This was it. The voice in my head had said it. The arrival is imminent. They were here for me. They had been watching, waiting for the transformation to finish, and now they had come to take me, or whatever was left of me. The voice in my head was louder now, no longer a whisper, but a command. Join us! I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, trying to block out the noise, but it was useless. The connection was complete. They were inside me, inside my mind, and I couldn't fight it anymore. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't need to turn around to know that they had entered. The air felt thick with their presence, heavy and cold. The shadows moved, and I could feel them closing in, their eyes watching me, waiting for me to make my choice. I tried to speak, tried to call out, but my throat was tight. The words stuck. I wasn't in control anymore. Then, the buzzing returned. It wasn't external this time. It was inside me, vibrating through my chest, pulsing with every beat of my heart. The silver patches on my skin glowed faintly, and I could feel the transformation speeding up, the alien DNA coursing through me, taking over every cell, every thought. The figures in the room didn't speak. They didn't need to. I stood up, my movements no longer my own, my body no longer mine. The buzzing grew louder, more intense, filling the room with a strange electric hum. The figures moved aside as I stepped toward the door, the cold night air washing over me as I stepped outside. They surrounded me, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, their bodies silent and still. But I could feel their presence, feel the connection between us, pulsing like a living network. I wasn't human anymore. I was one of them. As I walked into the night, the voices in my head became one, clear and unified. They spoke with purpose, with certainty. The arrival has begun. And somewhere, deep inside me, I felt it. The real me was gone. I wasn't supposed to see it. That's the first thing you need to know. The whole thing was supposed to be classified, buried under layers of government secrecy and black market deals, hidden from the general public. But thanks to my poor judgment and a late-night trip down one of the darkest rabbit holes on the internet, I saw something I shouldn't have. It started innocently enough, or as innocently as browsing the dark web can be. I've always been curious about things people aren't supposed to know, the kinds of conspiracy theories and secrets that never make it into the mainstream. I know, it sounds stupid, but I'm a sucker for those what-if stories. Late one night, after hours of scrolling through forums and encrypted chat rooms, I stumbled across a thread titled, "Antarctic Signal Intercepted. Anyone else see this?" The post was short, almost too vague, but something about it piqued my curiosity. There was a link to a file, nothing more. No explanation, no warnings. It was just there, waiting for someone reckless enough to click on it. And of course, that someone was me. I downloaded the file, not really expecting anything out of the ordinary. At first glance, It looked like a bunch of random data, frequencies, sound waves, and numbers that meant nothing to me. But buried in the mess of static was something strange, a signal. It wasn't like any radio transmission I'd ever seen. There was something off about it, too regular, too deliberate. It was almost like a pattern, but not one I could immediately decipher. It was late, and I was exhausted, so I saved the file and figured I'd come back to it in the morning. But before I could shut down my computer, I got a message. An anonymous account sent a simple note. "You've been flagged. Contact us." I stared at the message, my heart suddenly racing. Flagged? By who? And why? I ignored it at first, thinking it was some kind of scare tactic or prank. But the next day, when I logged back on, the file was gone. The link, the post, even the forum thread, it had all vanished without a trace. That should have been my first clue to back off. But no, I was too far down the rabbit hole to stop now. I spent the next few days obsessing over the signal, scouring the web for any mention of it. Every thread, every reference, led me to a dead end. It was like the entire thing had been scrubbed from existence. Then, about a week later, I got another message. This one wasn't from an anonymous account. It was from a government agency. At least that's what they claimed. The message was brief, professional, and to the point. "You've come across classified information. We need to meet." Attached was an offer to work with them on investigating the signal I'd found. They didn't give me any details, but they didn't need to. I'd been hooked the moment I saw the words classified information. I know what you're thinking. There's no way I should have said yes. But here's the thing. I wasn't thinking. I was too intrigued, too eager to know what I'd stumbled into. So, I accepted their offer. Within days, I was on a plane to Antarctica. The flight was long and cold, filled with official-looking people who didn't speak much. I wasn't exactly given a full briefing, but I didn't need one. I knew this wasn't some routine investigation. They weren't sending me halfway across the world to confirm some mundane transmission. This was something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. We landed at a small, isolated base, far from any of the usual research stations. It was more like a bunker than a research facility. Bare concrete walls, no windows, just the hum of generators keeping the place running. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones. When I arrived, I was immediately briefed by a man in a black suit. He didn't tell me his name, but he didn't need to. He had that air of someone who had spent years keeping secrets, the kind of guy who never gave you more information than you absolutely needed. He explained that they'd picked up a signal, a strange, repeating transmission coming from deep beneath the Antarctic ice. They'd been monitoring it for weeks, trying to decipher it, but nothing made sense. It wasn't coming from any known source, and it wasn't like anything they'd ever encountered. That's why they'd brought me in. Apparently, whatever I'd seen on the dark web wasn't just a random file. It was part of the transmission, an early version of it, leaked somehow, though no one knew by who or why. They didn't give me much time to process before shoving me into a lab with a few other researchers. We pored over the data for hours, trying to make sense of the signal. But the more we studied it, the more I realized this wasn't just some rogue broadcast or interference from a distant satellite. It was intentional. The signal wasn't just random noise. It had a structure to it, a purpose, and the closer we looked, the clearer it became. It wasn't coming from any human source. It wasn't coming from this world. By the third day, we'd managed to trace the origin of the signal to a location deep beneath the ice, a place that, according to every geological survey, shouldn't exist. There was nothing there, no underground facilities, no natural formations, just solid ice, thousands of feet thick, but something was down there. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, going over everything we'd discovered. The signal, the location. It didn't make sense, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. There was something deeply wrong about all of this, something that made my skin crawl. The next morning, the team prepared to investigate the site. They didn't give us much of a choice. We were flown out to a remote location, dropped off with nothing but a few tents, and the promise that we'd be monitored from the base. The sky was gray, the wind biting, and as we set up camp near the coordinates we'd pinpointed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time night fell, the signal had intensified. That's when things started to go wrong. The wind cut through us like shards of glass, the kind of cold you can feel in your bones. We were a group of 5, all huddled around the small, flickering heater inside one of the tents. No one said much, and I don't think it was just the cold that kept us quiet. We all felt it, an unspoken tension that clung to the air. The signal had grown stronger since we'd set up camp. It pulsed, a low, rhythmic hum coming from beneath the ice, like the heartbeat of something waiting, something alive. The equipment was picking it up, but none of us knew how to interpret it. It wasn't static or distortion. It was something else. I could feel it vibrating in my skull, a constant hum in the background of every thought, like it was crawling under my skin. One of the researchers, Dr. Collins, was staring at the readings on his tablet, his breath fogging the air in front of him. "It's fluctuating," he said, more to himself than to the rest of us. "The signal, it's getting stronger." I didn't know much about Collins, but he seemed rattled, his eyes wide and his fingers twitching over the screen. We'd been monitoring the signal for days now, and this was the first time it had done anything different. We were on the verge of something none of us could explain. The ground beneath us was thick with ice, the kind that had never seen the sun, layers and layers of it, miles deep. The equipment said there was nothing down there, no geological structures, no caves, but the signal was real, and it was coming from right below us. That night, after hours of staring at the equipment and making no sense of the readings, I finally decided to step outside the tent for some fresh air. The wind had calmed a bit, but the temperature was still brutal. The stars overhead were distant, cold pinpricks of light in the black sky, and the silence was unnatural. No wind, no movement, just that low, steady hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was just nerves, that the isolation was getting to me. But as I looked out over the frozen wasteland, I noticed something strange in the distance. Just beyond the edge of our camp, near the horizon, there was a faint glow. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, pulsing in time with the signal, like a beacon. My heart started to race. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Collins came out a few moments later, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He saw the look on my face and followed my gaze. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his face pale in the dim light. "It's coming from the coordinates." We gathered the rest of the team, and without speaking, we all started moving toward the glow. There was no discussion, no plan, just an unspoken understanding that we needed to know what was out there. The signal was pulling us, guiding us, like it had been waiting for us all along. As we approached, the glow grew brighter, but it wasn't like any light I'd ever seen. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was cold, sterile, and it seemed to pulse in time with the rhythm in my head, the same steady beat that had been with us since we arrived. The ground beneath our feet started to crackle, tiny fissures forming in the ice as we moved closer to the source. The air around us felt heavier, like it was charged with electricity, and the closer we got, the more that buzzing in my head intensified. Finally, we reached the source. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The ice beneath us had started to split open, revealing something buried deep beneath the surface. It was metallic, smooth, and impossibly large. The edges were sharp, angular, like a machine, but it was covered in layers of frost and ice. It didn't belong there. It didn't belong anywhere. Colin stepped forward, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. This isn't man-made," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising hum. I could feel it too. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't from Earth. It couldn't be. Before we could process what we were seeing, one of the researchers, a guy named Morales, pulled out a small handheld scanner and moved closer to the object. He was muttering something under his breath, his eyes fixed on the readings, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, something happened. The glow intensified, and the ground beneath us rumbled. It wasn't an earthquake, but it felt like the earth itself was shifting. Morales stopped dead in his tracks, staring down at his scanner with a look of pure terror. Guys?" His voice trembled. "This thing, it's alive." Before any of us could react, the ground gave way beneath him. He didn't have time to scream. 1 second, he was standing there. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the ice as it split open beneath him. I ran to the edge of the fissure, but it was too late. He was gone, swallowed by the thing beneath us. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. We just stood there, staring down into the darkness, the glow from the object casting eerie shadows across the ice. And then, we heard it. A sound, deep, guttural, like something shifting beneath the surface. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the ice. It was coming from inside the object. Collins backed away, his face pale. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. The signal was stronger now, pulsing through the air like a living thing, and the ground beneath us continued to shake. The fissure widened, and the ice cracked open like a mouth, revealing more of the metallic structure beneath. It wasn't just a machine. It was something else, something ancient, something alive. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, I felt it. A presence, not physical, but mental. Something in my head, pushing into my thoughts, prying them open like a door. I stumbled, clutching my head as the buzzing grew louder, more intense. The others were panicking now, shouting and scrambling to get back to the camp, but I couldn't move. The presence, it was inside me, and it was speaking, not in words, but in feelings, thoughts. Images flashed through my mind, stars, endless darkness, a sense of something vast and incomprehensible. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the presence withdrew. I collapsed onto the ice, gasping for breath, my vision swimming. I could hear Colin shouting, but his voice was distant, muffled by the buzzing in my head. I wasn't alone in my mind anymore. Whatever was down there, whatever was buried beneath the ice, it had seen me. And I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't human. I don't remember how we made it back to camp. The whole thing was a blur, a frantic scramble through the biting cold, the sky spinning above us as we tried to distance ourselves from whatever was beneath the ice. Collins was shouting orders, his voice barely cutting through the deafening hum in my head. But the further we got from the fissure, the more I could feel it, the presence pulsing beneath the surface, like a predator watching its prey retreat. By the time we reached the tents, no one was speaking. Everyone was too shaken, too aware that what we'd found wasn't something we could run from. It was there, waiting for us, and we had disturbed it. Collins and the others tried to regroup, to figure out what had happened to Morales. I could see the panic in their eyes. No one wanted to admit it, but we all knew the truth. He wasn't coming back. Whatever had swallowed him whole was beyond anything we could comprehend. I sat in the corner of the tent, clutching my head. The buzzing, God, the buzzing was still there, relentless, drilling into my skull. It wasn't like any sound I'd ever heard. It was more like a vibration, an energy, seeping into my bones, making it impossible to focus on anything else. The signal, it wasn't just a sound. It was alive, sentient. It had reached out, not just into the equipment, but into us, into me. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see them trembling, but they were steady, too steady. My mind was a wreck, my thoughts scrambled, but my body felt calm, almost like it was waiting for something too. The others were trying to contact the base, but the radio was dead. Every time Collins tried to speak into the receiver, all we got back was static, thick and heavy, like it was being choked. He threw the radio down in frustration, running a hand through his hair. "We can't stay here," he muttered. "We need to move. Find a way back." The problem was, there was no way back. Our transport wasn't due to return for another 2 days, and without communication, we were stranded. There was nothing around us for miles but ice, and beneath that ice, something far worse. The team argued for hours about what to do next, but I couldn't focus on their words. The buzzing was getting worse, intensifying with every passing minute. It was like something was building up inside me, pressure mounting, waiting to explode. And then it happened again. The presence. It came back suddenly, flooding my mind like an invasive wave. But this time, it wasn't just images or feelings. It was more intense, more deliberate. I saw things, glimpses of places I didn't recognize. Vast, empty landscapes, beneath a sky filled with stars that didn't belong to our world. And there was something moving through those stars. Not a ship, not anything built by human hands. It was alive, shifting through the darkness, searching. It felt hungry. The vision shifted, and I was back in the camp, standing over the fissure. Except it wasn't me. It was something else, something inside me, looking through my eyes. I could feel it moving, stretching, awakening from a long slumber, and it wasn't happy. I snapped back to reality, gasping for breath. My head was spinning, and my vision swam with after images of stars and darkness. The others hadn't noticed. Collins was still pacing, shouting something about a backup plan, but I couldn't focus on him. All I could think about was the thing beneath the ice. It had seen me. And worse, it was communicating with me. I don't know how much time passed before the ground beneath the camp began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, like a low vibration beneath our feet. barely noticeable. But then it grew stronger, more violent, until the ice was cracking, groaning under the pressure of something massive moving beneath us. Colin stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "What the hell?" The tremor knocked over some of the equipment, sending the radio crashing to the ground. We all stumbled, trying to keep our balance as the shaking intensified. But it wasn't just an earthquake. It wasn't natural. It was coming from beneath us, from the fissure. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and bolted out of the tent. I don't know what compelled me to run back toward the fissure. Maybe it was the presence in my head. Maybe it was something else. But I had to see it. I had to know what was down there. The others shouted after me, but I ignored them. The wind had picked up again, howling through the frozen landscape as I ran toward the distant glow, the ice cracking under my boots with every step. The buzzing was deafening now, vibrating through every part of my body, like the signal was growing stronger with every passing second. And then I reached the edge of the fissure. The glow from the object had intensified, casting eerie shadows across the ice. But it wasn't the light that stopped me in my tracks. It was the movement. The fissure was wider now, and something was emerging from it. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. Organic, but not. Metallic, but alive. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, pulling itself up from the depths of the ice, with limbs that didn't belong to any creature on earth. I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the thing, as it crawled out of the fissure, its massive body shimmering in the faint light. It had no face, no features, just a twisted mass of shapes and angles that seemed to shift and change with every movement. And the noise, it was coming from the thing itself. The signal wasn't just a transmission, it was part of the creature, an extension of whatever it was. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong anywhere. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I couldn't move. I could only watch as it rose from the ice, towering over me, its body pulsing with energy. The presence in my head was stronger than ever, and I realized with a sickening certainty that this thing wasn't just an alien. It was something far worse, something ancient, and it was awake. The others had caught up by now. I heard Colin shout something, but it sounded distant, muffled, like he was speaking through water. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw it, their faces twisted in terror. The creature turned toward us, though it had no eyes, no features. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it in my mind, pushing deeper, probing my thoughts, my memories. And then, with a single, horrifying clarity, I understood. This wasn't a discovery. This wasn't a signal we picked up by accident. It was a beacon. We didn't speak. No one dared to. The thing that had crawled out of the ice towered over us, shifting and shimmering in the dim light, an abomination of both metal and flesh. It felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to exist in this world, but somehow had forced its way through. The buzzing in my head had become unbearable, a constant, pulsing hum that seemed to sync with the movements of the creature, like we were connected in some sick, twisted way. Collins was the first to snap out of it. His voice cracked with fear as he grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the camp. "We need to go. Now." But I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the spot, my body frozen in place as the creature turned its head, or what should have been its head, toward us. I could feel it watching me, not with eyes, but with something deeper, something that went straight to my mind. It wasn't just a physical presence. It was inside me, crawling through my thoughts, my memories, pulling me apart from the inside out. The others started to back away, slow and deliberate, as if any sudden movement would trigger it to strike. But the thing didn't move. It just hovered there, like it was studying us, deciding what to do next. Then it spoke, not with words. There was no sound, but I felt it, deep inside my head, a presence more overwhelming than anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just a voice. It was like 1,000 thoughts crashing into me, all at once, layered with emotions I couldn't comprehend. Fear, anger, hunger. "You woke us," I recalled, stumbling backward, my heart slamming in my chest. The words weren't mine. They weren't even in any language I understood, but I knew what they meant. The thing had been waiting for someone to find it, to bring it back. Collins was pulling at me again, his face pale, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "We have to get out of here," he hissed. This thing, it's not supposed to be here." I shook myself free from the creature's pull, just long enough to start running, my legs finally obeying the primal urge to escape. We bolted, stumbling over the uneven ground, the ice cracking beneath our boots as we fled back to camp. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The weight of that presence was still pressing down on me, suffocating even as we put distance between us. But the buzzing, it didn't stop. By the time we made it back to the tents, the tremors had begun again. The ground beneath us rumbled, and the air felt thick, like the atmosphere itself was trembling. Collins and the others were scrambling to pack up equipment, to grab anything useful, but it felt pointless. I could sense it now. The thing wasn't going to let us leave. I doubled over, clutching my head as the pressure built again. The presence, whatever it wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was in the air, in the ground, in the very fabric of the world around us. The creature had awakened, and now it was spreading, reaching out. "You are too late." The words came again, more forceful this time, pushing into my thoughts with brutal intensity. It wasn't just a statement. It was a warning. The thing beneath the ice hadn't just been buried here. It had been sealed away, locked deep within the earth for reasons I didn't understand. And we'd broken that seal. Collins tried the radio again, but all we got back was more static. The air crackled with it, the signal stronger than ever, like the creature itself was jamming any attempt at communication. The others were panicking now, shouting at each other, their voices overlapping in a chorus of fear and confusion. I grabbed the radio, throwing it to the ground in frustration. "It's no use. We can't reach anyone." Collins stared at me, his eyes wide with fear. "What are we supposed to do? We're stranded out here." That's when the first scream ripped through the air. One of the other researchers, Jensen, I think, was standing near the edge of the camp, staring off into the distance. His face was pale, his body trembling. I followed his gaze, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. More figures were emerging from the ice. At first, they looked like shadows, distant and blurred by the cold wind. But as they moved closer, their forms became clearer, twisted, grotesque shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. They weren't human. They weren't alive in any sense we understood. They were part of the creature, extensions of its will, like phantoms summoned from the depths of the earth. The others scrambled, grabbing whatever they could to defend themselves, but there was no point. These things, these shadows, weren't physical. They moved like smoke, slipping through the air with a grace that didn't belong in this world. And they were coming for us. The buzzing was deafening now, drowning out all other sounds. It was inside my head, inside my chest, vibrating through my very bones. The creatures were getting closer, their movements erratic, disjointed, like they were shifting through time and space with every step. Then I felt it again, the presence. Stronger this time, more deliberate. You have unleashed what cannot be stopped. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. My legs buckled, and I collapsed to the ground, the ward spinning around me. I could hear the others screaming, but their voices felt distant, like they were fading away, swallowed by the overwhelming force of the thing's will. I looked up just in time to see one of the shadow creatures reach Jensen. It didn't attack him, not in the way you'd expect. It simply passed through him, its dark form merging with his body for a brief moment, and then he was gone. Just like that. 1 second there, the next. Gone. No trace of him left. No sound. No struggle. Just nothing. Collins was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could hear was the buzzing, growing louder, more intense. It was inside me, filling every part of me, like I was being consumed from the inside out. The creatures were closing in, their forms flickering and shifting as they circled us. I could feel the presence, its presence, looming over us, watching, waiting. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't an attack. This was a release. We'd broken the seal. We'd woken something that had been buried for a reason, something that didn't belong here. And now there was no going back. The buzzing reached a fever pitch, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was the end. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was the creature's final message, whispered into the depths of my mind. You were never meant to survive. The world was a blur of shadow and noise. The buzzing was unbearable now, a deep vibration that pulsed through my body like a living thing, drilling into my bones, into my thoughts. I could barely move, my limbs heavy, like they were no longer mine to control. Everything felt distant, detached, as if the world itself was slipping away from me. The others, Collins, the rest of the team, were still there, but they didn't matter anymore. I could see them scrambling, shouting, but their words were just faint echoes against the roaring presence in my mind. The shadow figures, those things, had surrounded us, their forms shifting, flickering in and out of sight like they were woven from the darkness itself. Collins was the last one still fighting. He had grabbed a flare gun from one of the supply crates and was pointing it wildly at the figures. "Stay back," he screamed, though his voice trembled. "Stay the hell away from us." But the shadows didn't stop. They moved with an eerie calm, gliding closer, their shapes barely more than distortions in the air, yet so impossibly real. They didn't attack. They didn't need to. They were part of something much larger, something we couldn't hope to understand. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to obey. The presence inside me, it was pushing deeper now, sinking into every thought, every memory, twisting them, unraveling who I was. I could feel its intent, its awareness pressing down on me, and I knew. This wasn't just some random creature we had woken up. It was something much worse. It wasn't just from another world. It was from another time. The shadow figures closed in, and Collins fired the flare. It shot up into the sky, bright and burning, casting long, grotesque shadows across the ice. For a brief moment, I thought it might work, that maybe, just maybe, the light would scare them off. But the flare flickered out as quickly as it had come, and the darkness rushed back in, swallowing everything whole. Colin stood there, staring, waiting for something to happen, but the shadows never stopped. One by one, they passed through him, just like they had with Jensen. His body stiffened for a second, his eyes wide with terror, and then he was gone. No scream, no struggle, just gone, like he had never existed at all. The others were already gone by then. I hadn't even seen when it happened, but I was alone now, the last one left. The buzzing in my head was louder than ever, a relentless thrum that made it impossible to think, impossible to focus on anything but the presence inside me. And then the ground began to shake again. The fissure, the one where it had all started, it was widening. The ice groaned and split, great chunks of it falling away into the depths below. The glow that had once been faint was now blinding, filling the air with a cold, sterile light that cut through the darkness like a blade. I should have run, but I couldn't. My body wasn't mine anymore. As the ground continued to break apart, I could see it, the thing we had woken. It wasn't just a creature. It was a machine. No, not a machine in the way we understand them. It was something more, something that defied logic. It stretched out beneath the ice, a vast, intricate structure of metal and organic matter, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. This was no ordinary alien life form. It was a relic, a remnant of something ancient, something that had been here long before humanity had ever crawled out of the ocean, and it had been waiting for us to find it, waiting for us to free it. The presence inside my mind was overwhelming now, filling every corner of my thoughts. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was speaking to me, not in words, but in concepts, ideas so vast and incomprehensible that my mind could barely hold on to them. I saw flashes of distant stars, entire galaxies consumed by shadow, civilizations wiped from existence by things that moved between worlds, between dimensions. This thing, it wasn't from our universe. It had been trapped here, buried beneath the ice for eons, locked away in the frozen tomb of Antarctica. And we had let it out. The shadows swirled around me, and I felt myself being lifted, pulled toward the gaping chasm in the ice. My body floated, weightless, as the presence in my mind pushed me deeper, guiding me toward the heart of the machine below. I could feel its thoughts, its purpose. This wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about domination. It was about remaking. As I was lowered into the fissure, I saw the core of the thing, the beating heart of the ancient machine. It pulsed with a dark, sickly light, like a black sun, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach out for me. The machine was alive, a living entity made of both metal and flesh, something that had transcended the boundaries of time and space. It had been sealed away because it was too dangerous, too powerful to be left unchecked. But now, it was awake, and it was hungry. I was being absorbed into it, my thoughts, my memories dissolving into the vast consciousness of the machine. I could feel it taking me apart, piece by piece, reducing me to nothing more than a fragment, a cog in its endless design. I wasn't me anymore. I was part of it. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the voice. That same voice that had whispered to me from the moment we found the signal. Welcome, you are the first. And then, nothing. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't work the way it used to. I can feel the others, the ones who came with me. They're here too, somewhere in the machine, their thoughts echoing faintly in the background. We're part of it now, part of something that stretches beyond our understanding. The signal, It's still out there, still broadcasting, calling out to the next set of curious souls who will make the same mistake we did. And when they find it, when they come looking, they'll join us, because the machine isn't done. It's never done. And soon, the whole world will hear its call.